a loving and outgoing mother of 3.
Everybody wanted to be around her and her energy and her beauty.
She was an incredible human being and a great mother.
Is found murdered in a farmer's field.
There was numerous blunt force trauma injuries.
Cuts, lacerations, bruising throughout her body.
This poor woman was brutally attacked and murdered.
As detectives hunt the killer, they unearth dark secrets.
All the information kept leading us to think that he was trying to find a way out of this relationship.
He would throw stuff, break stuff. He was really controlling. He was really manipulative.
They had an argument, something happened, it went too far.
Then, new revelations turn the case on its head.
In the video, there is a male party following her into the darkness.
I had absolutely nothing to do with. What did you have nothing to do with?
And points to a predator no one saw coming.
It was definitely a very big twist.
When the news came out, he made me sick. When I saw him, he looked like a monster.
Green Bay, Wisconsin is a relatively small, close-knit community where a lot of people know each other. Obviously, our claim to fame is having the Green Bay Packers in town here. So during football season, pretty much everything centers around that.
It's 100% a place that you would want to raise a family.
The crime rate in the Green Bay area is generally very low, especially when it comes to violent crime.
On a warm May afternoon in 2016, nearby Brown County Sheriff's Office gets a troubling 911 call from a local farmer.
Brown County 911, what's your emergency?
Oh, God. We just found a human body.
Is it a male or a female?
It's got long hair, but I didn't go near it. I'm about at the top of a hill just looking down on it.
The 911 call was from farmers working in a field, and they located a body.
Investigators race to the farmer's field on the outskirts of Green Bay.
The body was behind a brushy, woody area, not visible by the road itself.
It was laying face down with arms spread across the front of her head and feet towards the road. The victim was a blonde female, approximately in her 30s. Past that, we really didn't have any identifying information other than the pink wristband on her wrist. There was a distinct pattern that we found on the victim's back, which appeared to be from the sole of a shoe.
It wasn't until the body was turned that all the injuries were located.
The extent of injuries that she suffered were pretty horrific. There was trauma to her neck that would indicate possible strangulation, in addition to lacerations, bruising throughout her body. Her fingernails were damaged, indicative of defensive wounds. That tells us that she was fighting for her life.
There were nail clippings taken for the potential of any DNA from the suspect underneath her fingernails.
We were looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. However, the search of the area didn't reveal anything.
After questioning the farmer and clearing him of any suspicion, investigators try to determine how the victim ended up in his field.
The area was searched thoroughly for any clothing that may have been left behind, any other tracks, footprints.
There were a set of tire tracks that went from the driveway to where the victim's body was found and then circled back towards the driveway. The farmers work in the field were using a skid steer and a four-wheeler, and they definitely didn't match those pieces of equipment.
We definitely felt like this was likely the suspect vehicle that was used to transport the body there.
As detectives continue to process the crime scene, the local sheriff's office receives another call.
Brown County Public Safety, this is Therese.
How do I go about, with missing person?
Okay, and who's missing?
My girlfriend.
What's her name?
Nicole Vanderheiden.
Our dispatch center received a phone call from a party named Doug Dietrich reporting that he did not know where his girlfriend was, and the last he had seen or heard from her was the night before.
We felt very strongly that the missing person report was going to involve the victim we had in the field.
Officers from the crime scene are dispatched to interview the caller, 34-year-old Doug Dietrich, who lived with his girlfriend, Nicole Vanderheiden.
Is Doug here?
Hello.
Hi. I'm here for a missing persons report.
As allowed by Wisconsin law, officers secretly film the conversation.
It was important to record the interview with Doug. Based on the victim in the field, it's always in the back of our mind that this could be some kind of domestic violence issue that happened.
Doug looked completely hungover. He had really dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him why he's making this missing persons report.
I've only seen or heard from her since last night, but I'd say midnight, yeah.
Okay. Doug indicated that he and Nikki joined a group of friends out at a local establishment to participate in watching a live band.
Doug provides a telling detail when asked what Nikki was wearing.
She would have had a bracelet on.
Okay.
It was a pink bracelet for
Okay.
the 21 verification.
There was a wristband that the victim was wearing. So based on that information, we were quite certain that it was Nikki that we were with in the field.
As police work to confirm that the victim in the field is 31-year-old mother of three, Nicole Vanderheiden, they learn more about her background.
Nikki was born in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Then she went to high school here. She was the most amazing, inspiring, beautiful, happy woman I have ever met in my life. She always enjoyed being around family.
After high school, Nikki attended the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, graduating in 2010.
Nikki's background included a double major in science and education. From that, she was a substitute school teacher.
Nikki was one of the hardest workers I've known. She always had two jobs as a substitute teacher and waitressing.
Outside of work, Nikki was dedicated to fitness.
She definitely took care of herself, and she worked out a lot. Everybody wanted to be around her and her energy and her beauty. We always complimented how beautiful she was, and she was, inside and out.
In 2005, Nikki got married and had 2 children, but the marriage ended in 2012.
Nikki was definitely a hands-on mom. I think it made her proud to be able to do that, because being a single mother is not easy.
Then, in 2015, Nikki met Doug Dietrich.
Nikki and Doug had a spark. They moved very quickly and got pregnant, and she was so excited to become a mother of 3 beautiful children. Nikki and Doug were still learning to live with one another. It was definitely a life changer.
As Nikki's boyfriend, Doug is a leading suspect in her murder. He is brought to the sheriff's office for a formal interview and informed that the body police have found is most likely Nikki.
This body that was found down the street, there's a lot of similarities.
Doug was crying, emotional, in a state of shock.
With Nikki identified as the victim, detectives asked Doug to recount the events leading up to the last time he saw her alive.
Doug reported that they had been out at a concert at the Watering Hole, which is a bar in a suburb of Green Bay.
As the night progressed, they had been consuming alcohol, and Doug had ran into some friends from high school that he had not seen in a while. And he confirmed that Nikki was mad because she saw Doug talking to another female at the Watering Hole, and this basically set her off.
From there, they got separated. He stayed at the Watering Hole with his friend Greg, and Nikki went with their friend group to the Sardine Can, which is downtown Green Bay.
Doug had last actually seen Nikki around 11:30 when she departed from the Watering Hole to the Sardine Can.
At some point, Nikki did get a hold of Doug on the phone.
What did she say?
Who are you talking to? She was, I said, a little drunk and irrational, not making any sense.
Detectives ask if they can search Doug's phone for any texts he'd exchanged with Nikki.
Nikki was definitely angry texting Doug. She made mention of what bitch are you talking to. She was accusing him of cheating, telling him that he was abusive. It was actually a really big red flag for me.
Had Doug and Nikki's argument escalated into violence later that night?
It started to kind of click with everybody that they had an argument, something happened, it went too far, and Doug may be involved.
Coming up, detectives learn more about the night of the murder.
When we look at the video footage, you can see a male follower out of the gate.
We are trying to figure out what exactly happened a short distance away out of camera view.
She's not wanting to have anything to do with him and starts turning into an argument and becomes a little bit physical.
And uncovers surprising new suspects.
I'm going to tell you that your timeline seems so abundantly rehearsed. The time, to be honest with us, is right now.
Before a stunning twist throws the case into turmoil.
The true killer came completely out of left field.
The Google dashboard data showed him at every single crime scene that we had.
I was very concerned who this could be. Who did this to our beloved Nikki?
After confirming that the body discovered in a farm field is 31-year-old mother of three, Nikki Vanderheiden, police suspect that her violent murder may be linked to an angry exchange of texts she had with her boyfriend Doug Dietrich the night she was killed.
The text messages definitely led us to believe that if Nikki would have made it home, and if she would have had contact with Doug, there would have been some sort of altercation.
When detectives press Doug about what happened that night, he claims that after 12:30 a.m., he and his friend Greg left the bar they'd been at to look for Nikki at another bar.
Doug describes getting to the sardine can with Greg, finding that Nikki's not there, and then continuing to look around for her and being concerned.
Doug stated that he had assumed that Nikki made it home and that she would be there when he got there, so him and Greg got in their car and drove home.
With Nikki's two older children away for the night with their father, Doug says he got home to find the babysitter and his son, but no Nikki.
She said we haven't heard from Nikki, and I was just kind of figuring wherever she went, with friends or whatever. And that's why I went to bed.
She did not come home at all last night after you.
Not at all. There wasn't a blip or word from her.
He said that he woke up to give the baby a bottle at 6:30 in the morning, and Nikki wasn't there.
And it did not appear that Mr. Dietrich was all that concerned until later in the day, which drew our suspicions.
I did have concern as to why did it take until about 4:30 the next day to report her missing.
Following their interview with Doug, investigators obtain a sample of his DNA and release him.
The initial interview with Doug was basically to get him locked in so that we could corroborate everything that he was telling us through either physical evidence or through other statements from other witnesses.
As police set out to verify Doug's story, Nikki's family and friends learn that she's been murdered.
Knowing that Nikki was murdered and how horrific it was impacted our lives in a very horrible way. Who the hell would do this to someone with such an amazing, beautiful soul?
Reports of Nikki's murder spread shock through the community, and Nikki's family members share their grief on local news.
Heather Meyer and her family say it doesn't seem real.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. She's been extremely up and down, numbing pain.
As Nikki's loved ones continue reeling from her death, an officer from the sheriff's office makes a crucial find.
An officer located some clothing on the side of the road, approximately a mile drive from where Nikki's body was located. Deputies were able to identify the clothing as Nikki's.
There was blood located at numerous areas in the clothing. The majority of the blood was in her pants area.
There was also a purse located which contained her ID. Her cell phone was also found at that same location. It was pretty apparent that it just got tossed out the window in a panic just by the suspect wanting to get rid of it.
As they submit Nikki's items to the lab for testing, detectives receive her autopsy report.
The primary injuries were the strangulation and trauma to the head.
They had discovered over 240 injuries to Nikki's body, including 30 to her head and face area. The last few minutes of Nikki's life would have been very painful.
There were injuries to her genitalia, which could be indicative of a sexual assault. The medical examiners did do a sexual assault exam, which included swabbing for evidence. The lab started finding a partial male profile, but they didn't have enough information to get an identification of it.
The crime lab advised us that we would need to continue to submit samples that the suspect would have touched. We're only allowed to send in so many exhibits at a time, as the crime lab is very busy. We have hundreds of swabbings of Nikki's clothing, so I started off with areas where you would more likely see some touch DNA.
While they await answers from the crime lab, detectives get a hold of security video to learn what they can about Nikki's last hours.
When we first were able to take a look at the video footage from the sardine can, we were able to identify Nikki there with Doug's friends. Initially, she appeared to be having a good time, dancing around.
The later portion of the evening, we can see Nikki and her group of friends at an outside table, and you can see Nikki looking down at her phone. You can tell by her body movements that she is upset.
And eventually, she gets up and storms off through an entrance that they're sitting nearby.
What detectives see next catches their attention.
After Nikki leaves, you can see a male follow her out of the gate.
Police ask themselves, who was this man? And was he involved in Nikki's murder?
We knew that his information was going to be vital. That was the last time Nikki was seen before she was killed.
We wanted to know everything that he saw and heard because he's the last known person that we knew that saw her alive.
The day after Nikki Vanderheiden is found murdered in a farmer's field, investigators are trying to track down the man seen following her out of a bar just hours before she was killed.
In the video, there is a male party following after Nikki and walking off into the darkness. We are trying to figure out what exactly happened a short distance away out of camera view.
Officers are dispatched to interview patrons who were at the bar that night.
Based on the interviews with witnesses, we knew that male was Aaron Kalinsky.
This was a friend that they were with earlier in the night.
Police track Aaron down and bring him in for an interview.
Aaron advised us that throughout most of the night, Nikki was having a great time. And then at some point, he saw a mood shift in her. He basically had said that Nikki was trying to get a hold of Doug and that he wasn't responding.
Nikki ultimately became very angry, and that's when she left the sardine can on foot. Aaron describes following her and trying to convince her to come back and get a taxi or an Uber to go back home.
What Aaron says happened next raises detective suspicion.
But she's not wanting to have anything to do with him, and it starts turning into an argument and becomes a little bit physical.
At one point, Nikki fell to the ground on her own, and she started creating a bigger scene. Aaron advised us that she began kicking and punching at him as he was trying to help her up. He had tried to tell her, "Hey, we can get you home, you can come with us," but she refused.
Aaron noticed that there were people in the neighborhood seeing what was going on, so he decided to just leave it alone at that point.
Investigators wonder if there's more to the story than Aaron's telling them.
We were actually able to find those people, and they indeed remembered a female and male yelling or having a disagreement.
Continuing to watch the video, Aaron does return a very short time later. And based on the other statements from the friends that were with the group, we knew that Aaron didn't necessarily do anything wrong.
Aaron says he and his friends took an Uber home, never to see Nikki alive again.
There was video footage that showed Aaron and the other group leaving in an Uber, and there was no indication that they had come back to the area after they left.
With Aaron crossed off the list, police continue scouring the bar's security video for clues and find something unexpected.
We eventually saw Doug and Greg arrive there. Doug told us they're looking all over for Nikki, but the video is showing that he and Greg go to the bar and just start hanging out. It definitely isn't consistent with the sense of concern that he was initially talking about.
According to the surveillance video, Doug and Greg stayed at that sardine can until about 2:15 in the morning. And the fact that Doug said that they did all this looking while at the sardine can told us that he's not being entirely truthful with his efforts to locate her.
Detectives wonder if Doug had misled them about his concern for Nikki. Was there something he was hiding?
Just the mere fact that he didn't know where his girlfriend was and didn't appear to care all that much was a red flag.
With their suspicion growing, police reach out to Nikki's family to learn more about her relationship with Doug.
Nikki's mother and sister, they both voice concerns of Doug's behavior.
I know. It's really, really rocky during her pregnancy and their relationship. It's a crazy relationship. He's always been very controlling. I and Dad's very get rated her. Yeah.
Nikki's mom, as well as her sister, Heather, both say that they wouldn't be surprised if Doug was the person that was responsible for this.
Investigators search Doug's name in police records and make an alarming discovery.
Checking police records, we did locate past girlfriends that accused him of being abusive. There was at least one incident that was reported to police, but was never charged.
Police contact the woman who filed a complaint against Doug and ask her for more details.
When you would argue, it would be...
He would spit in my face.
Okay.
He would, throw stuff, break stuff. He was really controlling. He was really manipulative.
So when we saw that, that was obviously very concerning to us.
He tackled me and broke my ankle.
Despite learning that Doug's ex-girlfriend had a prior assault conviction and that Doug had never been formally charged for domestic violence, investigators remain suspicious.
At this point, we had the information that showed there could be the pattern of this abusive, aggressive behavior, and we know that Doug and Nicole had a volatile relationship, which would lead us to believe that there would be some sort of confrontation that night.
Police obtain a warrant to search Doug and Nicole's home.
During the search at Doug and Nikki's house, there were several things of concern that were located. There was blood on the floor in the garage. There was blood and dirt found in Nikki's vehicle.
There was also a set of Nike Air Jordan shoes that had a herringbone pattern on them, which was similar to what was on Nikki's back. There was also some red marks on the surface, appeared to be blood on the bottom of those shoes.
While conducting the search, Doug's neighbors from across the street approached police with a startling new discovery.
While mowing their lawn, they noticed a blood spot on the curb line of their property, and also they hit a cord of some type with their lawnmower.
We did find a large quantity of what appeared to be dried blood, as well as 2 pieces of electrical phone charging cord. There was also some clumps of blonde hair.
The blood on those items and the blood found in the road were positively identified as Nikki's. It was pretty apparent to us that that's where the altercation took place. That's where she was likely killed. When that crime scene in front of the house was located, that gave us a theory of what happened, and it continued to point us towards Doug as the suspect.
After determining that Nikki Vanderheiden was likely murdered on the street in front of the home she shared with Doug Dietrich, investigators are weighing a growing body of evidence against Doug.
This evidence that we found is kind of emboldening what we had initially thought, that Nikki got home, an argument ensued between her and Doug, and this incident took place in the street, and somehow some of that evidence would have gotten transformed into the garage and then into Nikki's vehicle.
Looking at the totality of the circumstances, we decided there was probable cause to arrest Doug at that point.
Okay. Right now I'm going to be taking you into custody, be handcuffing you. I'll explain all that to you in a bit. And transporting you down to the sheriff's department. Okay? Okay. Be cooperative with me.
All right. With Doug in custody, detectives work to solidify their case against him.
When we did the search of Nikki's car and found the blood and the dirt in the car, it was initially thought that that may have been the vehicle that was used to take Nikki to the field where she was located.
One of the things that we learned was that she had a progressive snapshot device in her vehicle, which is used for driving behavior, insurance rates. But we figured that this could help us show location from the night she was murdered.
Once we got those records back, it was found that her vehicle did not move the night of her murder. At that point, all kinds of questions are still out there. The big one being if Doug was involved in this, how Doug may have moved her. Did he use a different vehicle? Did he have help?
We knew that Doug's vehicle was not in play. It was at the watering hole all night, where it was verified on video.
One person whose name came up was Greg Matthew, who was actually driving Doug during their night out and dropped Doug off at home.
Greg was Doug's best friend, was with Doug that entire night, and we were focused on him maybe being an accessory.
Investigators bring Greg to the sheriff's office and ask him about the night of the murder.
Greg was very exact about timelines of phone calls and what they did that night.
12:15, got in my car, Nikki was calling him, yelling at him, telling him she's leaving. By the time we get back to Sardine Can, all of our friends left. At what point we left, it was probably 2:15. Got to Doug's house probably at 2:45 and went back to my house. My parents were home. They know that I was there the rest of that night.
Greg's timeline was very consistent with Doug's, which was suspicious in nature that you usually aren't going to have your times down that path.
I'm going to tell you that your timeline seems so abundantly rehearsed, so that the time, to be honest with us, is right now.
We pressed Greg very hard, hoping that we would find some sort of inconsistencies in his story or get him to crack and finally turn on Doug.
Honestly, I had absolutely nothing.
To do with what? What did you have nothing to do with?
Anything to do with
What did you have nothing to do with?
So I would like to leave.
After becoming upset with some questions, he did leave while investigators were still sitting at the interview table talking to him.
Investigators asked Greg's parents to confirm his alibi of coming straight home from Doug's shortly after 2:45 a.m.
Greg's parents told us they were only going off of what he told them. They didn't physically see him or have any firsthand knowledge.
While detectives keep Greg on the board as a potential accomplice to Doug, they receive DNA test results from the crime scene.
There was little to no sign of Doug's DNA anywhere on Nicole's body or clothing.
Doug's DNA profile is not matching up with an unknown male DNA profile that we're finding on those items.
Test results on other evidence bring even more disappointing news for investigators.
It turns out the blood on the floor of the garage was likely from a turkey that Doug had killed while hunting. The blood in Nikki's car was from one of her other children, and it was not Nikki's.
What we thought was blood on the bottom of the shoe tested inconclusive for blood.
So all those things that we thought we believed to be Nikki's blood turned out not to be. We also got location data from Doug and Greg's cell phones that corroborated their account of where they were that night, down to the times they left the bar, the route they took home, then when they got back to Doug's house, and from there.
With no concrete evidence linking Doug to Nikki's murder, authorities release him from jail.
Doug's DNA isn't really showing up where we thought it was going to be, and there's still this unknown male profile that really threw a curve at us.
Police believe that Nikki was murdered in front of her own home. But if Doug hadn't killed her, who had?
I was very concerned who this could be, who this monster could have been that did this to our beloved Nikki.
Two days after finding Nikki Vanderheiden savagely murdered, detectives hunting her killer arrested her boyfriend, Doug Dietrich. But when DNA evidence exonerates Doug, detectives turn their focus to one urgent question.
The biggest question we had to answer outside of who did this was, how did she get home? We spent countless hours watching video surveillance of every single known business between Nikki's residence and the sardine can. We had investigators watching highway camera footage, bridge camera footage to see if we could catch either her walking or crossing the river to get to that side of town.
We were running out of leads. It was frustrating at times.
Still hoping for a DNA match to the killer, investigators continue sending the crime lab samples of Nikki's clothing found at the side of the road.
We picked 10 items at a time for testing. We were looking for any items that we believe might contain more of this unknown male's DNA, hoping for a full profile. After sending several batches and not coming up with anything definitive, we ended up sending a batch that included the socks that Nikki was wearing still when her body was found.
The crime lab were able to get enough of a profile off of that sock to be able to enter it into the CODIS system.
The suspect somehow got some touch DNA on those socks.
Entered into the National DNA Database, the profile returns a hit that takes investigators by surprise.
The DNA hit that we received was that of George Stephen Birch, who was from the state of Virginia.
As far as we knew, he had no relation to anybody that was with Nikki that night or Nikki herself. All the information we had was leading us towards Doug. So once we got that DNA information, it was very surprising.
George Birch was in and out of prison on the East Coast, and at some point earlier in 2016 had moved to the Green Bay area.
So we start digging through the Green Bay Police Department records, see what we can find out about him.
George Stephen Birch was contacted by the Green Bay Police Department a few weeks after the homicide for a hit-and-run car accident. The vehicle was a Chevy S10 Blazer that was found a short distance away from where Mr. Birch was staying.
At the time, he was questioned about it and claimed that the vehicle must have been stolen.
Suspicious about the nature and timing of the supposed theft, investigators see if his Chevy Blazer could have been used to dump Nikki's body.
We ended up comparing the specs of a Chevy Blazer and the width of the tire tracks that we found in the field, and we found it to be a very near match.
Digging deeper, detectives find even more evidence connecting George to Nikki's last known movements.
We knew that he hung out at a bar that was down in that same general area of the sardine can.
We were able to identify Birch's Google account and track the location of the cell phone that Google account is associated with.
The Google dashboard data showed us roadmap of Mr. Birch's whereabouts that night. and he was found at every single crime scene that we had, including the farm field, Nicole and Doug's residence, the roadway where Nicole's property was found, and then back at his residence.
When we got that information, we knew we had our guy at that point.
Police track down George Birch and bring him into the sheriff's office.
When we had our contact with Mr. Birch, it was obvious that this wasn't his first contact with law enforcement. He's very cool, very calm.
The reason you're here is in reference to a homicide investigation into Nicole Vanderheiden. Okay? So, is this something that you want to talk to me about?
Sir?
What's that? For a lawyer. Okay.
Birch didn't provide any details or provide his version of events of anything. We still didn't necessarily have the details on how they met, why they were together.
But with DNA and other evidence firmly implicating him, police charged George Birch with Nikki's murder.
When the suspect was arrested, it was a result of actual physical evidence, and I felt so much relief that the family would never have doubt as to who did this to Nikki.
When the news came out about who did this, he made me sick when I saw him. He looked like a monster.
On February 19th, 2018, George Birch goes on trial for the murder of Nikki Vanderheiden. But when he finally takes the stand, what he says leaves the courtroom stunned.
At trial, Mr. Birch's explanation for what happened was he met Nikki at the bar. They were getting along, flirting, having a good time, and he ended up bringing her back to her house where she resides with Mr. Dietrich.
George said they were having sex in front of Nikki's house in his vehicle, and at some point someone comes out, hits him over the head with a pistol, and knocks him unconscious.
The next thing that I remember was literally waking up on the ground outside the truck.
He wakes up and finds Nikki already dead on the ground and someone holding him at gunpoint.
At that point, did you know who that individual was?
Never seen him before in my life.
Do you know who that individual is now?
Now I do.
Who was it?
It was that Dietrich.
Investigators believe that 31-year-old Nikki Vanderheiden was brutally murdered by convicted felon George Birch. But at trial, George blindsides everyone by claiming that Doug Dietrich was the one responsible for Nikki's death.
Mr. Birch in the courtroom was very arrogant, very pompous. His demeanor was that of, I'm innocent and Doug did this.
Mr. Birch advised us that Doug ordered George to drive the body to the farm field. George said that Doug had ordered him to carry Nikki's body into the field and drop it. George then said that at one point he was able to get into a struggle with Doug, push him away, and get back into the car and take off.
He didn't come up with that story until he had a chance to look at all the evidence that was being filed against him.
George's wild allegation forces detectives to dig deeper to prove his guilt.
Part of the obstacles in this was disproving that Doug did it and show his movements from that morning and that night.
During the investigation, we learned that Nikki had given Doug a Fitbit device as a gift. So we realized that Doug was wearing that Fitbit device during all our contact with him. So we're able to review the information on the Fitbit device when he was home, going to sleep, and waking up again.
Based upon all the Google dashboard data that we had from George, we knew at what time he and Nikki arrived back to Doug and Nicole's residence. So we were able to look at Doug's Fitbit to show that at that time that George and Nicole were outside, Doug was sleeping and not, in fact, out murdering his girlfriend and disposing of the body.
Back in court, Prosecutors used the location tracking evidence to demolish George's story.
The act of violence that Doug allegedly did to him did not add up with any of the other evidence that we had.
None of us bought George's story in court. We all knew it was a joke and a fairy tale made up. I think Nikki just wanted to get home to her children, and I know she fought for her life that night.
Now prosecutors put forth their theory of what really happened that night.
What I believe happened is that there was some arguments between Doug and Nikki.
I believe that Nikki did leave the sardine can pretty upset and ended up at Richard Cranium's bar about a half mile away.
She was intoxicated. She was by herself. She was emotional. She is a very outgoing, personable person. So she'd be very easy for someone to prey upon.
At some point, she meets George Birch. They get to talking. He offers Nikki a ride home. She accepts it. They end up in front of her house. I believe at that point, George thought he was going to get some action for taking a girl home and didn't expect her to start fighting.
And that enraged Mr. Birch.
It turns into a sexual assault. At some point, he strangles her with that phone cord that was found.
She fell out of the vehicle. He continued to stomp on her back and her head, eventually killing her. And then loading her up in his vehicle, driving her to a field and disposing of her body, and then going home like nothing happened.
This poor woman was absolutely brutally attacked and murdered in front of her own home where her baby lay sleeping, and the thought of what he did to her is beyond comprehension.
After closing arguments, it didn't take very long at all for them to make a decision.
The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, George Stephen Birch, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide
For murdering Nikki Vanderheiden, George Birch is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
The true killer in this homicide came completely out of left field. I felt extreme relief for the family that someone was going to answer for this extremely heinous, horrific crime.
He's going to prison for the rest of his life. That was music to our ears, but we still knew it wasn't going to bring our Nikki back.
Nikki had 3 young children at home, one of which is a newborn. She had her entire life ahead of her and a lot of things to accomplish and a lot of friends and family that miss her.
She was an incredible human being, a great mother, and she should be recognized as that.
Despite the pain of Nikki's loss, her friends and loved ones are devoted to keeping her memory alive.
My children and I, we celebrate her life every year on May 21st, and we talk about her, and we go to the cemetery. I love to remember Nikki dancing and smiling and laughing. I loved her laugh. It was so contagious. She was always smiling. I love to remember her that way.
A kind-hearted young woman, beloved by friends and family.
Samantha always had a smile on her face. She loved people, and people loved her, and she loved her cats.
Found bludgeoned and strangled in her own home.
I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
Military people use that knot fairly often. It was a square knot.
Police explore whether her search for love took a deadly turn.
He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless.
She told me he parked in her driveway and just sat there.
He fit that mode of being a stalker.
Until a shocking discovery.
We found that he was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Reveals a killer no one saw coming.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all.
I was in shock.
Frankly, I'd never seen anything quite like this before.
Wichita Falls, Texas, a former oil boomtown that grew into a small city.
Wichita Falls is a town of about 100,000 people, about 130 miles west of Dallas.
It's quiet community. We're very close-knit community.
It does have a small town feel to it. It's not difficult to get to know just about everybody in town.
But the town's sense of security is shattered on the morning of January 6, 2003, when police get a call from a woman who says she's just discovered her friend's lifeless body in the bedroom of her home.
I was a rookie police officer, and we got this call that somebody found a body. And we rushed over to the scene. When he arrived, I remember seeing her friends, and they were very upset.
The frantic couple tell the officer the deceased woman is 28-year-old Samantha Lazark.
At this time, I still don't know what exactly is going on.
I arrived 30 seconds to a minute after the first officer arrived. So when he entered the residence, I was right behind him.
So we weapons draw, and we're clearing through the bottom of the house, the kitchen. We start going up the stairs, and we got down the hallway to her bedroom. And that's when I realized we have a murder.
The victim was kind of in a prone position. I noticed the pool of blood was around her head, and I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
I'd never seen a female that was murdered like this. This was my first time to actually see that, and that gets to you.
We proceeded to establish a crime scene.
A few minutes later, detectives and forensics arrive.
The victim had a ligature made of coaxial cable tied very tight around her throat. It was a square knot. There's a couple of places you learn knots like that. Military people probably use that knot fairly often. And so it told me that whoever killed Samantha was versed in the knot based on some training.
The cable was not the only weapon used by the killer.
There was a fire extinguisher a few feet away from her that had hair and blood on it. There was definitely blood at the back of her head, a lot of it.
There were some handprint, ridge detail on the fire extinguisher that appeared to be in blood. It looked like there was some fingerprint detail even on the coax. A strangulation death has some up close and personal aspect to it. Based on what we saw, we thought there was a good chance the killer actually knew the victim.
Detectives examined the rest of the room for any other clues.
In the middle of the bed was a laser pointer.
On top of the laser pointer was some blood spatter. So we figured that the pointer had to have been on the bed when the injuries occurred to the victim.
And looking around the house in general, none of the windows were broken and all the doors were intact. Whenever you don't have forcible entry, your first thought is that it's someone that she knows.
Police immediately begin the process of interviewing Samantha's neighbors.
One of the neighbors had written down that a car with California tags was at Samantha's home on about January the 1st.
The car from California had been seen 5 days prior, but a different neighbor noticed another suspicious vehicle less than 24 hours before Samantha was found dead.
There was a 12-year-old young man who noticed a motorcycle at Samantha's home. He said it was red and black, and so information about the motorcycle was noted.
Soon, news of the murder reaches Samantha's loved ones.
I just barely got to work when my husband calls and he tells me to come home, and he said that someone had killed Samantha the night before. I went into instant shock. That's just not something you can comprehend. I mean, is this really happening?
I got a phone call from a friend, and he told me to turn the news on, and her house
was on the news with police tape all around it. I went numb. I fell to the ground. Because, Samantha, why would someone want to hurt her?
Samantha Lazark grew up in the small town of Terrell, Texas, and was the oldest of 3 children.
Samantha had 2 brothers, Joe Jr. and Lance. He was the baby. And Samantha practically raised him when I could work. She was very responsible. She could cook, she could wash clothes, and she loved little kids, and she loved elderly people. She was one of them late bloomers. She didn't really care that much about boys until she met John.
Samantha married her high school sweetheart, John Lazark, at age 20.
John, he went to school to be a refrigerator repairman, and Samantha worked at the grocery store, and her job was real important to her.
I met her when I worked at Albertsons, and Samantha was everyone's favorite cashier. You may be having a bad day, and she just make you happy. She was very high-spirited. She loved her cats. She loved music, and she just loved her tattoos. Everything she had a meaning. She had her fairies on both arms. Then she had one on her chest right here that was for John. It said, "Always in my heart."
A devoted wife, Samantha was blindsided when after 8 years of marriage, John left her for another woman.
She just kept crying to make him happy, and she was so devastated when he left.
Samantha picked herself up, and several months later, she began dating again.
Samantha's confidence definitely changed. I think Samantha was just trying to have fun, get out back into the world, try new things.
Who killed this vibrant and kind young woman, and why? To try to answer these questions, police interviewed the couple who found the body, Lori and Donnie Nieves.
With Lori and Donnie, as they were the last ones in the home before the police arrived, we certainly needed to make sure that there was no information that would tie either one of them to the actual murder.
Detectives start with Lori, who says she and Samantha were co-workers.
Lori described herself as being a good friend of Samantha's, and she said Samantha didn't come to work, which was very unusual. She didn't answer the phone. Donnie had taken Lori to work that morning, and so he came back to get her and take her to Samantha's home to check on her. Lori said they knocked on the door and didn't get an answer, but the door was unlocked, and so they went in and looked around, and they went upstairs and found Samantha deceased.
Investigators speak to Donnie next, and he confirms Lori's statement.
Donnie characterized Samantha as being his wife's friend. He said that he was only there because he gave his wife a ride to go check on Samantha.
Detectives ask the couple if they know anyone who would want to harm Samantha.
Lori pointed her finger at Samantha's estranged husband, John Lazark. Lori said that John was upset with Samantha because she was about to end his health insurance coverage that she'd been paying for, and he had an injury that was going to be very expensive if he didn't have insurance.
Investigators learned that this ongoing conflict had recently escalated.
Lori said Samantha told her in the couple of weeks before the murder. Samantha and John argued about the health insurance, and John told her something to the effect of, "I want to take everything you have away from you." And so that threat certainly raised a red flag for us and made us wonder if John Lazark had anything to do with this murder.
Coming up, police unearth a hidden online world.
Samantha signed up for one of the chat rooms. Her username was Meowmix28.
The information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
I warned her plenty of times. Watch who you're giving your address out to.
And hunt a bold killer with sinister motives.
The fact that he couldn't take no for an answer made us want to figure out exactly who he was.
He pressured her to meet in person, and she said, "What if you're a serial killer?"
There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon.
Until investigators close in on an unlikely suspect.
He looked like a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
one of the most evil human beings.
I was seriously afraid that there would be another victim.
Police are investigating the violent murder of 28-year-old Samantha Lazar. Detectives have learned that Samantha and her estranged husband, John, were in a bitter dispute.
She had threatened to take him off her health insurance policy. And Samantha's friend said he did make a threat at one point.
That made us want to know more about John and the relationship with Samantha.
Investigators learned the marriage had only ended 6 months prior. They asked those close to Samantha about what led to the breakup.
Her best friend was going through a divorce, and Samantha, being the kind-hearted person she was, let her move in.
Samantha noticed that her friend and John seemed to be a lot closer, perhaps, than what she was comfortable with.
Finally, she asked them if they were having an affair, and they said, yeah, they were in love.
I remember how upset she was. I mean, how else could you feel when your husband leaves you for your best friend?
John moved out with his new girlfriend, but remained in Samantha's life.
They were separated, but John would move back in with Samantha. When he kept moving in and out, it was hell, because he wouldn't leave her alone.
Samantha finally told John to move out for good, so she could get on with her life. But John was still dependent on her health insurance.
John, when he was 18, a car fell on him when he was working underneath it and messed up his back. He was really anxious about the insurance.
Investigators bring John in to the station.
During the interview with John Lazar, he said that he and Samantha had sorted out the insurance and that she was not going to terminate his health care coverage.
John also denies that he threatened Samantha like her friend claimed. But as he talks, detectives notice a suspicious detail.
He had some small injuries to his hands that we wanted to talk to him about. John explained that he cut his hands while moving a table. The night of the murder, John said that he was with his girlfriend and that she in fact confirmed his alibi. If I were in love with somebody and they killed somebody else, I may lie for them, but there wasn't anything to contradict what he said. We asked John for fingerprints and a sample of his DNA, and he agreed to do that.
Police have nothing concrete to tie John to the murder. But before they let him go, detectives ask who he thinks might want Samantha dead.
John Lazar told us that his estranged wife was online dating.
John said he told her it was risky. He might run into some dangerous people.
Investigators set out to verify John's claim.
We interviewed Samantha's friend, Lisa, and Lisa told us that she knew that Samantha was in fact online dating.
Samantha told me one day that she signed up for one of the chat rooms. It was so new back then. She just made a username and started meeting guys. Her username was Meowmix28. It was her love of cats, and she was 28 years old.
When she started meeting these guys online, I said, you don't know these people. You're not letting them come to the house, are you? And I could tell that she didn't want me to know because she knew it was going to upset me really bad.
The computer forensics lab examined Samantha's conversations with people online, making arrangements to meet people that she'd chatted with online.
Investigators compare the messages with details of Samantha's dating life provided by her friends.
Lisa told us that Samantha was dating a man named Chris, and she'd spoken with Samantha the evening of the murder, in fact, and that Chris was at Samantha's home visiting with her.
I did not know Chris. I'd never met him. I know she really liked him and liked hanging out with him. She said Chris was over at her house that evening when she called me. I had bought her the latest season of Friends that was out on DVD, and she said, we're going to watch Friends. I'll call you tomorrow. And that's the last time I talked to her.
Police determined that the call with Lisa around 6 p.m. was the last contact anyone had with Samantha. She was found dead the following morning, just before 10 a.m.
Because Chris was with Samantha shortly before she died, we really wanted to look at to see who Chris was and where he was.
Investigators search for Chris in Samantha's online chats. However, they find her most recent correspondence, only 2 days before the murder, is with a man who goes by the username I Am Elliot.
I Am Elliot said that he had recently lost his wife, and Samantha said, well, I've recently lost my husband to my best friend.
I Am Elliot seemed very sympathetic to her in their messages, and she seemed to respond to that.
We weren't sure who I Am Elliot was.
Her conversations with I Am Elliot had seemed pretty innocent, and there was no association with the name Chris, so the investigation moved on from there.
Detectives dig deeper into Samantha's chats, looking for messages with a darker tone.
So the forensic lab was able to retrieve a chat with somebody initialed KS, and the information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
This individual pressured her to meet in person almost immediately, and so that raised red flags about him. He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless, and ironically she said, what if you're a serial killer? But in the end she went along with it.
Detective suspicion only grows when they realize the chat between KS and Samantha is dated January 1st, just 5 days before the murder.
One of the neighborhood watch people had seen a Mercedes with California license plates on it that had been at her house January 1st.
It had all of the signs that we were on the right track with this guy. So we ran the license plate number, and the tag came back to Christoph Slora.
Could Christoph Slora, KS, be the Chris who was with Samantha just hours before she was found dead?
Samantha's best friend said that the night she was killed, she was with somebody named Chris.
So we said, hey, maybe this is the Chris that we're looking for.
Three days after the murder of Samantha Lazark, police have linked her online chat to the owner of a car with California plates seen parked at her house just days before she was killed.
The neighbor had written down the license plate number of Christoph Slora's car.
Police believe that Christoph is the man behind the username KS.
When we looked at the online chat between KS and Samantha, they were obviously involved with each other sexually. And as we were looking for a Chris, we were really interested in finding that person.
Samantha did tell her friend that she was hanging out with a guy named Chris the night of her murder.
Alarm bells ring when they dig deeper into their suspect's background.
Christoph was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base here in Wichita Falls.
Christoph wound up being somebody that was in the military. There was a perfect square knot in the ligature that killed Samantha, and I've already thought that somebody perhaps with a military background knew that square knot.
While officers are sent to bring Christoph into the PD, detectives receive Samantha's autopsy report.
The cause of death was strangulation, and that the coax was the means.
The report also shows significant blunt force trauma to the back of Samantha's head.
I think it would be really hard to just strangle somebody with a cable, and I suspect that the fire extinguisher was used to incapacitate Samantha so that she couldn't fight back.
There was no evidence found during the autopsy or any other testing that showed there was any kind of sign of a sexual assault.
Forensic analysis of the murder weapons gives investigators hope that the killer will be identified.
From the lab, we learned that the coax had, and that the fire extinguisher also had DNA from who we believed would be the killer.
The evidence that came back from the lab was very powerful. Fingerprints were on both the weapons, so it's pretty clear that if we could find one person that matched all these pieces of evidence, that we had the person that committed this crime, not just beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt.
Armed with new insights into the murder, Police head to the local Air Force base to look for their #1 suspect.
When we tracked down Chris Laura, we asked him if he would come in for an interview, and he agreed to do that. He admitted that he had had a sexual relationship with Samantha, but they didn't have a whole lot else in common, and he said he hadn't seen her for some time.
Investigators ask him to explain why witnesses saw his car outside Samantha's home on January 1st, just 5 days before she was killed.
At that point, he did not have anything to do with her death or being over there the day of the murder.
Police want to know where Chris was the night Samantha was killed.
Chris Laura said that he spent the day with some friends at a batting cage and offered up the names of his friends. We followed up that information by interviewing his friends, and they assured us, in fact, Chris Laura had been with them during the day and into the evening that day.
Detectives conclude that Chris Laura was not the Chris that Samantha was with when she called her friend at 6 p.m. But they can't rule him out as the perpetrator, since the exact time of her death is unknown.
Even though his alibi was pretty good, it wasn't airtight. And so Chris Laura provided prints and DNA sample for us.
With no hard evidence against Chris Laura, he's free to go. 4 days after her murder, family and friends gather to lay Samantha to rest.
Samantha's funeral, it was packed. It was full of people that loved her. It was beautiful.
She had a really big funeral. It was just hard. Nobody should have to bury their child. And the way she died was so violent, and I couldn't stand the thought of what actually happened to her. I had to take all of her pictures down for a while. I just couldn't deal with it.
The next day, detectives ask Samantha's friends if they know of any other men she may have been involved with, and receive stunning new information.
Lisa raised the name Donnie Nieves to somebody that she thought that had an affair with Samantha.
Lori and Donnie Nieves were the last ones in the home before the police arrived. They found Samantha deceased. I was surprised because when we interviewed Donnie at the time, Donnie characterized his relationship with Samantha as being his wife's friend. But after the funeral, Samantha's friend Lisa said that Donnie was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Lori was a good friend of Samantha's and also a co-worker, but Samantha told me that Donnie and her had a short, intimate relationship shortly before she was killed. Samantha definitely felt guilty about it.
Once we realized that he had been a lover of Samantha's, we had to look at him more closely.
He had not been forthcoming before about this affair, so it makes you suspicious that this person has something to hide, and maybe what they have to hide is they're involved in the crime. That is a red flag.
It's been 1 week since 28-year-old Samantha Lazark was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in her home. Now, investigators have learned that Samantha had an affair with the man who discovered her body.
When Donnie Nieves was first interviewed, he failed to mention that he had been intimate with Samantha. When we interviewed Donnie again and confronted him with the question, were you lovers with the victim, he admitted that he was, and that it had been a very brief, intense relationship.
Detectives asked Donnie why he didn't tell them about the relationship before.
He said he didn't want his wife to find out about this affair because he knew she wouldn't be happy about it.
Had Donnie killed Samantha to keep her from telling his wife Lori about their affair?
We kept digging into him and seeing if there's anything that would connect him to the murder.
Donnie insists he did not kill Samantha and begs investigators not to tell his wife about his infidelity.
We asked him if he'd give DNA and fingerprints, and he cooperated.
Police let Donnie go, and while they wait for his DNA and fingerprint results, investigators uncover another suspicious exchange with an online suitor in Samantha's chat room history.
His username was Death Metal. Samantha formed a relationship with Death Metal based on their mutual enjoyment of that kind of music.
The messages suggest the pair had been on several dates, but then something changed.
From the correspondence, he thought it was a pretty good relationship. And then all of a sudden, without warning, she told him she wanted to break it off.
The relationship may have been over, but the man continued to send Samantha messages.
The fact that Death Metal couldn't take no for an answer certainly made us want to look at him pretty close and figure out exactly who he was and interview him.
Had the man been so enraged by the rejection that he murdered Samantha? Police ask Samantha's friend Lisa if she can help identify Death Metal.
Samantha's friend Lisa said it was a guy by the name of Connor Days.
Connor was the one that really got to her, made her nervous. I warned her plenty of times, like meeting people online, watch your back, watch who you're giving your address out to, your phone number. And he was the only one that really stands out in my mind that he scared her.
He just wouldn't stay away. He left notes on her door, even though Samantha told Connor that she didn't want to have anything to do with him any longer. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit.
Samantha told me one day he parked in her driveway and just sat there, and she'd call me and she wouldn't know what to do.
Connor would fit that mode of being a stalker, coming around a lady's house all times of the day or night. And that stalker profile is the one that can lead to someone being a murderer.
Connor looked really good for this, only he wasn't a Chris. But Samantha had dated him shortly before the murder, and we certainly knew that we had to find him.
Investigators track down Connor and bring him in for questioning.
When we interviewed Connor Days, he was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. He didn't seem to have a lot of interest in the fact that she was dead. And that was either I absolutely didn't do this, or I'm trying to throw you off, and we weren't sure which one it was.
Police asked Connor why he wouldn't leave Samantha alone after she broke off the relationship.
Connor admitted he kept coming back around even though she didn't want to see him any longer. And it wasn't until she pressed the issue that he actually left her alone. And so when asked for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, Connor said that he was home alone and he didn't have anyone else to substantiate that claim. And that's a problem. Connor was asked during the interview to provide a sample of his DNA and prints for us.
With no hard evidence linking Connor to the murder, he is released. 3 weeks have passed since Samantha was found dead, and investigators still haven't found the elusive Chris that was with Samantha the evening she was killed.
There had been an awful lot of work done, and we still hadn't solved the case. There was kind of a frustrated feeling that the person hadn't been caught yet.
As they await news of an arrest, those closest to Samantha struggle with the pain of losing her.
The mental images, imagining her maybe crying out for her mom or her dad or even me, somebody to come help her. It just makes me sick knowing someone could do that. Like one of the most evil human beings.
I couldn't grasp the thought that my daughter was gone and she wasn't coming back.
1 month into the investigation, police are running out of leads. But then they receive the forensic results they hope will blow the case wide open.
When you get information about whose prints and whose DNA is on that coaxial cord that was around the throat, that's just the place where you work to be. There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that was the killer.
It's been 1 month since Samantha Lazark was killed, and detectives have just received lab results from evidence found on the murder weapons.
We had all these suspects and were able to obtain possession of DNA samples and fingerprints.
Will the results match John Lazark, Samantha's estranged husband, Donnie Nieves, who had an affair with Samantha and also found her body, or one of her online suitors, Connor Dace or Christoph Slora?
It did seem like we were on the brink of solving the case, but the results came back, and it did exonerate all these people.
Investigators are stunned. The DNA and fingerprints don't belong to any of their suspects, or even anyone in the police database.
We were hoping for the match, and it's a little disheartening when you think maybe you've got something, and then it turns out not to be at all.
I talked to the DA and the lead detective, but I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
It did concern me that Samantha was never going to get the justice that she deserved.
With the investigation back to square one, police review all the evidence and statements they've collected so far in their hunt for Samantha's killer.
While we were looking back through the notes, we remembered that there was a youngster in the neighborhood that said something about a motorcycle having been around the night that Samantha died. So we asked the computer forensics people to look for the keyword motorcycle, and they came back with information that, in fact, I.M. Elliott said that he had a motorcycle.
When detectives previously looked at chats between Samantha and I.M. Elliott, they didn't find any red flags in the correspondence or any indication his name was Chris, so they moved on to other leads.
Our conversations with I.M. Elliott had seemed pretty innocent, and during the correspondence, he told her he worked out at Metro Photo.
Metro Photo was a camera shop in Wichita Falls.
Investigators rushed to the store, hoping to locate their new suspect.
The 12-year-old said the motorcycle was red and black. And we went by the camera shop, and there was a red and black Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It was an aha moment, if you will.
We ran the plates on the motorcycle. We found out it did belong to a person named Christopher Kyle Russell.
The tag came back to Chris Russell. And we said, Chris. Aha. It made it even a bigger aha moment for us. And that's when we decided it was time to know more about Chris. And Chris Russell was enrolled at Midwestern State University here in Wichita Falls, taking some criminal justice classes. He looked like he came from a good home, and he was a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
His family was well-to-do, respected members of a large church here in town. His profile was almost too good to be true.
Our first interview with Chris was a trip to Metro Photo, where we went in and asked him to come with us, and he did.
At the station, investigators begin by asking the 21-year-old if he was with Samantha on the night of her murder.
He was polite, but he declined to give an interview. He was asked to give his DNA samples and fingerprints, and he said he needed to talk to a lawyer before he did anything.
Even though it's Chris's right to tell us no, maybe it's because he had something he didn't want us to know. So we served Chris a search warrant in order to obtain prints and DNA from him.
As detectives wait for results, they continue to look into Chris Russell's past and discover he served in the armed forces.
Chris had in fact been in the Marine Corps, but only for a matter of days. They sent him packing after they got a good look at him. That was a large red flag that the Marine Corps didn't want him.
With Chris looking increasingly suspicious, what detectives discover next is chilling.
In the chat between Chris and Samantha, he said that he had recently lost his wife, and we looked into this and found some, frankly, rather terrifying information.
Investigators learn that Chris lived in the small town of Chadron, Nebraska with his wife Tara, who died only 10 weeks before Samantha's murder.
It was a short time after she had passed away. One night he packed up his belongings and moved back to Wichita Falls from Chadron.
Police contact law enforcement in Nebraska for information about the death of their suspect's wife.
Chris Russell's wife died under circumstances that at first was real pneumonia. However, when the autopsy came back and there was noted some bruising on the neck, that tells me that probably wasn't pneumonia. That sounds to me like a strangulation.
But by the time the autopsy information was released, Chris had already had his wife cremated and left the state.
I think the original autopsy didn't go into enough detail for authorities to charge Chris with that murder, and now that she had been cremated, that was never going to happen.
Police fear they have an emerging serial killer on their hands. Detectives obtain a search warrant for Chris's residence.
Chris lived with his parents here in Wichita Falls. While we were executing the search warrant, we noticed in Chris's bedroom a photograph that we thought was Samantha, but that was his deceased wife, Tara. Chris Russell's wife died, and weeks later, Samantha's now dead, and she looks incredibly like Chris Russell's wife.
Police uncover more disturbing clues in Chris Russell's bedroom.
We found a book, and it was a book about knots. And had I not known that there was a square knot around Samantha's neck, I probably wouldn't have looked twice at that book. And we also found some laser pointers.
The laser pointers found in Chris's bedroom were nearly identical to the one found at the crime scene.
There wasn't actually a smoking gun found during that search warrant, but there were certainly bullets to load that gun with.
Investigators seize Chris's computer and confirm that he's the man behind the username I Am Elliot. But as they start reviewing his chat logs, police discover another troubling detail.
We found that Chris, not only was he seeing Samantha, but he was seeing another young lady in Wichita Falls as well.
Fearing that their killer could strike again, police rush to track the woman down.
I was terrified about her. I was seriously afraid that she would be another victim in what looked like a continuing pattern from Chris Russell.
Police investigating the murder of Samantha Lazark have learned that their prime suspect's wife died under suspicious circumstances and believe that his new girlfriend is in grave danger.
I was worried he would do something else again. This nice young lady has no idea what she's involved with. We were certainly worried that she might be another victim in this case.
Detectives locate the woman and inform her that Chris is under investigation.
She was surprised to find that Chris perhaps was involved with the murder here in Wichita Falls. When we interviewed her, she said that Chris had brought her a DVD of Friends to her home and that it was opened when she got it.
Investigators believe it's the same DVD Chris had watched with Samantha on the night of her murder.
Samantha told her friend Lisa that she and Chris had watched that DVD of Friends at her home. But when we searched the crime scene at Samantha's house, the Friends DVD was not there.
With the evidence against Chris growing, police receive his DNA and fingerprint results.
In the end, there was only one person with DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that would be who killed Samantha, and that was Chris Russell. We arrested him at work. As I recall, he didn't seem surprised we were there at all. In fact, he didn't have anything to say about it.
At trial, prosecutors put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
The day of the murder, they were having a nice Sunday afternoon together and went out to her house, and her friend Lisa talked to her on the phone and things were still going good when he was there, evidently.
Maybe Chris brought her a laser pointer so that she could play with her cats. Then something happened that caused him to be angry.
The first thing was a surprise attack from behind because the bruises were all on the back of her head. He knocked her to the floor. At that point, the coaxial cable was in connection with the television set, and he had evidently ripped it out, which indicated a person who is very angry. And she's desperately trying to fight him off. At the same time, he starts looping that coaxial cable around her throat once, twice, and then a third time. And then he ties the knot there. And all the time she's getting weaker as blood is flowing out of her body. Then he strangles the life out of her.
With no confession from Chris, no one knows his motive for murdering Samantha.
You'd always like to know exactly what happened at the Lazark home that night, but something caused him to decide that he was going to kill her that night.
The jury finds Chris Russell guilty, and the judge gives him the maximum sentence of 99 years in prison.
There was an overwhelming sense of relief that we had taken somebody from society and put them someplace where they weren't going to harm anybody. And that's that big, deep sigh you get when you know in your heart that you did a good job. When you look at Chris Russell at first glance, you see a nice, clean-cut young man who was going to college to better himself and who was a regular churchgoer.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all. I guess what we should take away from a case like this is that we need to take caution when we meet people online. You can't be too careful.
An investigation is later opened into the death of Chris Russell's wife, but no charges have been laid. For Samantha's family and friends, the pain of losing her will never go away.
I want my daughter back, which I know that's, not ever going to happen. And she was special. She really was. She loved everybody, and she loved her mama the best. But I don't know what to say. I don't know. We can't get her back.
That day, Chris took my best friend, an amazing person, a person that can never be replaced in your life. I know she's watching down on me. I know she tries to protect me, and Samantha inspired me to definitely not take things for granted and to just live each day, make it the best I can. She's just made me a better person.
A wealthy commodities trader with the world at his feet.
My brother was a fun-loving guy.
He had anything he wanted. He had a lot of money, the Cadillacs and the Rolex watches.
Is viciously gunned down.
And they shot him again and again and again.
With his wife and kids in the home at the time of the attack.
It was a very traumatic event to the family, with people with guns threatening them.
You can't dismiss the fact it was a home invasion, but a lot of it didn't add up.
I had no idea at all how this could have happened.
Police chased down a number of suspects.
There was a complete falling out between them. Someone could get killed over a debt that they didn't pay.
A sudden disappearance leaves everyone on edge.
There was a trader. He disappeared off the face of the earth. It was suspected there was foul play involved.
Or one dead and one missing. Put a different spin on this type of investigation.
Every lead brings investigators to a dead end.
It's very frustrating to have a case that hits a brick wall.
Until 30 years later.
They were holding a very big secret inside.
When the shocking truth is revealed.
Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. That's not even human. That's the devil.
Just 30 minutes outside of Chicago lies Inverness, Illinois.
Inverness is one of the wealthiest suburbs of Chicago. It's a safe, beautiful neighborhood.
Some would call it very rich, very large homes, and very few crimes are ever committed in that area.
But on April 30th, 1979, at 3:20 p.m., police receive a distressing call from a 15-year-old girl named Becky Gamari.
Her words were, "There's been a robbery. My dad's been shot." She was bleeding from the chest. The police responded immediately.
As we entered through the front door, we were met by Becky Gamari. She was crying and pointing downstairs. I went downstairs and I saw a male who was leaning back in the sofa who appeared to have numerous gunshot wounds. There was a woman who was kneeling at the feet of the victim, crying almost in hysterics.
The woman identifies herself as Jackie Gamari. She says the victim is her husband, Carl, and that she and her 3 youngest children, Bobby, Carly, and Nick, were in the home when the intruders stormed in.
Those children must have been terrified and felt so helpless. It's horrifying.
The family were taken out to the squad cars so that they were secure and away from everyone.
Investigators set to work processing the crime scene, starting with the body.
I went over to the victim. I didn't find a pulse. There was a number of bullet holes in his chest with the blood basically draining down to his pants. I noticed a 9mm gun, and there were a number of 9mm casings that were strewn about the victim's feet. There was also a small .380 caliber handgun. It appeared that a 9mm was placed to make some type of a statement. This could be a staged killing. The victim, his legs were crossed at his ankles. It didn't appear to be a natural position. I went and took an inventory of what the rest of the house looked like. The bedrooms, the dresser drawers had been opened. A number of items appeared to be tossed on the floor. I could see that there were jewelry boxes that still had jewelry in them, which raises questions as to why they actually came to that residence.
Was this a legitimate robbery? Was this staged to cover something up? You can't dismiss the fact it was a home invasion, but a lot of it didn't add up. It did bring into question that they were there really to kill the victim.
We took a number of fingerprint lifts from the kitchen, the dining room, and the bedroom area.
One of the officers noticed there was no forced entry. Nobody kicked in the door or pried it.
As police continue working the scene, Carl's family receives the tragic news.
My sister called me and says, "You better get home, Carl was shot." So the whole neighborhood where the house was all cordoned off. We were told by the police he's in the house, he's dead, and they're investigating. So we were all like stunned.
When this happened, it was just a huge, huge shock, and we didn't know how to react. Disbelief and just can't be.
Carl Gamari was born in Elmwood Park, Illinois in 1944. He was the third of 4 children.
My brother Carl was a fun-loving guy. You know, he liked to go out and have fun, you know, go on dates with girls and go to parties and things like that.
When Carl was in high school, he met the love of his life.
When he started dating Jackie, he was like 18, and I think she was 17 at the time. He just knew that this was the one, and, you know, he wanted to get married, and he wanted to get married now.
Still teenagers, Carl and Jackie started a family right away.
Carl was excited to be a dad. They had 4 kids. Becky was the oldest, Bobby was the second oldest, Carly was the third daughter, and then Nick was the youngest. He was his son.
By 1977, Carl had the perfect family and the perfect job, working in finance at the Chicago Board of Trade.
Carl climbed up the ladder. He was energetic, and he loved it, and it fit his personality to a T.
He had anything he wanted. He had a lot of money. He came to Cadillacs, Rolex watches, and things like that. He started living a high life.
From the outside, Carl's life seemed picture perfect. But now, his violent death leaves his family shattered.
He's been shot, and I was shocked. You know, no one knew anything. What's going on? I had no idea at all how this could have happened.
Investigators start by interviewing Carl's family, who were also witnesses to the crime.
I took Jackie and the 2 girls out to the garage so I could get a general statement from them as to what occurred.
Jackie was crying and very upset. Becky was crying. Bobby was crying. this was the most traumatic thing children could go through. They said Carl went to work. Jackie was at home with Bobby, her 13-year-old daughter, 5-year-old Carly, and 2-year-old Nick. Around 12 or 12:30, Bobby is laying on the couch, and she's watching TV, and 2 men come in, and they have guns.
She said the 2 men were wearing stocking masks and dark clothing, and they had come in through the unlocked back door.
They point the guns at her, and they ask her, "Where's your mother?" So Bobby leads these men to the master bedroom where Jackie is on the phone. They ask Jackie for her money, and she says, "I only have $20. And they said, "We're here for more than that." These men tie Bobby's hands behind her back, and then they tie up Jackie. They force them into the master bedroom closet with Carly, with baby Nick. Time is passing. Bobby said that she heard a man yelling, "No," who she thought was her father, and she heard 3 banging sounds, which she believed were gunshots.
Becky came home approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon from school. She walked in through the front door, called for her mom. All she heard was crying from the master bedroom. At that time, she found them banging on the closet door to be let out.
Once Becky opens up the closet doors, Bobby went directly down to the basement, and Bobby saw her father's bloody, bullet-ridden body laying on that couch. It is difficult to imagine how terrifying this must have been.
While the family lived through an extremely traumatic ordeal, police are hopeful that with their help, they can catch Carl's killers.
Jackie and Bobby said that the suspects had actually pulled up their masks, so they had their face exposed to them.
Jackie described the first suspect as a male white, mid to late 20s to 30s, tall, dark-haired, and also had a mustache. The second suspect was shorter than the first, slightly heavier, was a white male, but had a pale complexion and facial hair.
Bobby and Jackie were able to do composites of the faces they saw. I think there was a lot of hope somebody's going to recognize these individuals.
When we heard about the sketch, we thought that would be it. They'd be able to find them.
I was hoping to get the information out as quickly as possible with the suspect's description, so that if someone was possibly stopped or seen within the general area, a patrol vehicle could have stopped them.
In Inverness, where crime is virtually non-existent, police believe there is more to this case than meets the eye.
It appeared to be a staged crime. It could be someone who owed money to someone and being shot for that, a jealous boyfriend. It could be a number of different things. You can't close your mind to any possibility at that point in time.
Coming up, investigators uncover sordid secrets.
He might have had some associates who might have been involved with the mob. It definitely raised a red flag.
The killers evade detectives until an unexpected witness steps forward.
You told me how it was going to be done, how they were going to kill Carl.
To reveal a dark and twisted plot no one predicted.
As soon as they knew how Carl was going to be murdered, and that's exactly what happened to him.
That was the missing key.
Police are investigating the murder of commodities trader and father of 4, Carl Gamari. His wife and young family were at home at the time of the terrifying attack.
Jackie and the 2 girls were mostly in shock. They were completely overwhelmed by what was happening.
Jackie and Bobby saw the gunman. Armed with their description, officers go door to door looking for witnesses.
One of the neighbors saw 2 men coming from the Gramaris through her yard, and she thought one of them was carrying like a jewel bag. After that neighbor pointed out where she saw the 2 men walking through her yard, the detectives went back and followed that path. They had found a cigarette butt that still had ash on it by her driveway.
That cigarette butt was collected by the State Police Crime Lab, but in 1979 there was no DNA, so there really wasn't much of the evidence that could be collected off of that cigarette butt.
More witnesses come forward to help police trace the suspect's movements.
There was a woman who was in her car around the time that this incident took place. She stated that she saw a beater-type gray car parked on the side of the street. When she returned approximately 3 o'clock or so, she said that she saw the vehicle oncoming towards her. She said that the driver was a white male. The second passenger in the front was a white male, but he was trying to slump down in the seat. In her words, she thought he was trying to hide himself.
The neighbor who saw that vehicle coming towards her with the 2 men was also able to do a composite.
It's similar to the one Jackie and Bobby gave police.
Composites are very, very useful. You can put them in the newspaper, you can get them on the news, you can get them out there for people, other agencies, to see if anybody could identify them as possible suspects. So after the canvass was conducted, they then did a sweep of the area between the victim's house and where this car was observed to see if they could find any evidence. They also discovered tire impressions and some footwear impressions that were in the mud there where the car had been parked.
Back at the crime scene, investigators get an unexpected visitor.
I noticed someone approached me and he pulled out his credentials as being a Chicago police officer and told his name was Sam Greco. Sam said that he was a family friend. The girls knew Sam. They felt comfortable around him.
He said that he had been called by the daughter, that something had happened, so he was coming out to see what assistance he could lend.
On the day of the murder, Becky made 2 phone calls. She did call 911. Her next call was to Sam to tell him what had taken place.
Sam originally arrived up the scene about an hour after the initial call. He had advised them that he had been on the phone with Jackie. This was about 12:30 in the afternoon, and that during their conversation, she said somebody was there, and he heard some voices in the background, and then the call was disconnected. So he had offered to give them his phone record so they could try to establish a timeline of when that occurred.
Based on the time of the phone call, police believe the gunman arrived at 12:30 p.m. and left by 3 that afternoon. They spent over 2 hours in the home, a detail that puzzles the investigators.
They spent so much time in the house, which is not normal. Home invaders usually come in, take care of business, and leave. They don't sit around. Second, the amount of items that were left behind didn't indicate that this was a straight-up home invasion.
My question was whether or not they knew that Carl Gamari was coming home at that point in time, and why did they kill him?
Who did it and why? And why my brother? What did he do that he deserved to have his life snuffed away and taken away? We had no idea who it could be.
In their search for answers, detectives turn back to Carl's wife, Jackie.
Anytime you're investigating a murder within a family, you have to look at the surviving spouse. It was clear that Jackie hadn't been the one to shoot Carl. 2 armed invaders came into their house and locked them in the closet. It was very traumatic to the kids and to Jackie. To have all of a sudden their peaceful day broken down with people with guns and then threatening them and not letting them move around the house, not knowing what was going to happen next.
They were absolutely terrified. Even after the suspects had left, it was difficult to get them to concentrate on making a statement. Jackie was crying, upset.
When detectives ask Jackie about her relationship with Carl, she tells them she loved him and that he was her high school sweetheart. But what she reveals about her marriage surprises investigators.
Carl and Jackie had a rather unorthodox situation at times. Over the years, they both had affairs, and they would bring their lovers home.
When you get information like that, that's an important thing to follow up on and look further to see if that has anything to do with what occurred here.
Had the couple's infidelities led to Carl's murder?
You have to look at that as a possibility.
It definitely raised a red flag.
It was definitely shocking.
Detectives investigating the cold-blooded murder of Carl Gamari have learned he and his wife, Jackie, had both been unfaithful.
That's a big red flag and needs to be looked at very thoroughly.
Jackie tells police they had recently agreed to work on their marriage.
They seemed to be getting better as you got into 1979. They were trying to work it out.
They went on a romantic vacation. They were making a plan to do another big trip to Africa. They were buying a new house, and they would tell friends that, yeah, things are getting back together for us. We're going to make an effort to make this work, especially because of the kids.
A year before the murder, the couple had even decided to renew their vows.
We as a family thought, wow, this is nice. This is really nice to see, that they wanted to get together and they have us there witness the renewing of their vows.
They were like two lovebirds. He was gleaming from ear to ear, and so was Jackie, and they seemed like a wonderful couple.
While Jackie was also a victim in this crime, detectives still need to know if she'd have anything to gain financially from Carl's death.
It was learned that there was only about a $30,000 life insurance policy. Carl had never signed a will, which ties it up in court, and it could be 7 years before you see any of the financial gain from this. So this kind of cleared Jackie of being in the spotlight of the investigation.
Investigators consider whether Carl and Jackie's renewed marriage could have driven one of their former lovers to murder. When they ask Jackie who she had an affair with, her answer is surprising.
Jackie and Sam Greco had an affair.
She said that she had dated Sam for quite some time, but that she had broken off the relationship with Sam to recommit to her marriage with Carl.
Jackie had said when she became pregnant with Nick, she stopped seeing Sam.
Detectives need to know, was Sam a jealous ex? Could he have killed Carl to have Jackie to himself?
Sam was interviewed once on the phone and then again in person. He had met Jackie at a wedding, and he was doing some private investigative work, and Jackie had hired him to follow Carl to see if he was having an affair. There was an indication from Sam's investigation that Carl was having an affair,
and that ultimately led to them initiating a relationship.
Sam also told the investigators that he and Jackie had been lovers, but they were now just friends.
Sam denied any involvement with this case.
They took his phone records, fingerprinted them, and they interviewed individuals associated with Sam.
He was considered a hero within the Chicago Police Department. The police back then still investigated him as much as they could.
The investigators ruled him out as not being involved in this.
With Sam eliminated from the investigation, detectives next look at the woman with whom Carl had been having an affair.
Gail Kayak was someone whom Carl had actually hired and worked with.
When Gail was interviewed, her description was it was kind of two adults having some fun together. It was nothing serious. She knew it was going nowhere. She knew Carl was married.
Gail tells investigators she and Carl broke things off about a year ago, and that there wasn't any animosity between them.
She ended up, after the relationship was over between her and Carl, had a boyfriend, got pregnant. Given the affair had been over for a year, it just made really no sense that she would be involved in this in any way.
Just when detectives think they've hit another dead end, Gail gives them a stunning new lead. She says they need to speak to Carl's former friend and colleague, Ned Kaiser.
Ned Kaiser was one of the closer people to Carl at the Board of Trade. They had worked together there for a while. They socialized.
Gail claims Ned not only knew about her affair with Carl, but told Jackie about it.
Carl and Ned were friends. Carl would use his apartment to be with his girlfriend. Ned ultimately got upset with Carl, told Jackie that Carl was using his place to be with his girlfriend. Once Carl found out that Ned was the one who told Jackie about Gail, that soured the relationship.
Gail also tells police Ned had a dark reputation.
She had rumored that he had ties to organized crime. Whenever you're dealing with people with money and investment and all, there's always a possibility that someone could get killed over a debt that they didn't pay.
Had Carl and Ned fallen out over money? Had Ned put out a hit on his former friend?
You always look at the big picture. Business dealings with Ned, him betraying Carl to Jackie about using his place, Ned having some possible mob connections. I think you got to look at everything. You have to see what's there. Where does that lead you? Is this a person who has a reason to kill Carl?
Police are following a tip that the murder of successful trader Carl Gamari may have been a targeted hit, one organized by his former friend and coworker, Ned Kaiser.
Ned Kaiser might have been, quote-unquote, involved with the mob.
During the 1970s, Chicago was very much involved with the criminal network of the mob, and a number of people wound up dead every year.
Organized crime had a hand in gambling. From information obtained from co-workers and people that knew Carl, he gambled at the Board of Trade, he would gamble outside. Well, if individuals are gambling like that, then chances are they would cross paths with organized crime people.
5 days after the homicide, Ned is brought in for an interview. Police ask about his friendship and working relationship with Carl.
The relationship with Ned and Kaiser and Carl and the family was an extensive, involved one. They had known each other for approximately 9 years, and at one point, when Ned was going through a divorce, they actually let him move into their house.
Ned says that's why he had a hard time keeping Carl's affair secret.
Ned had told investigators that the reason he came forward to Jackie was because he was friends with both of them, and he just felt that Jackie was being mistreated by the way Carl was acting and needed to correct it.
Detectives ask Ned if Carl was indebted to him, or if they had any conflict about money.
Ned denied ever having any kind of a fight with Carl. Ned was asked if he had any involvement, if he knew anything about Carl's murder, and he denied having any direct knowledge. There was nothing that anyone could dig up that would say Ned was responsible for Carl's death.
The investigators took a very hard look at him to see if there was any way that he could have committed this crime. And they were able to rule him out. There was no evidence connecting him to the murder of Carl Gamari.
Investigators are forced to let Ned go.
The police talked to everyone that they possibly could. If they talked to one person and that person mentioned other people, they went and talked to those people as well. And then it gets to a point where there's just no other leads to pursue at that time. So the police are essentially waiting for new information.
Authorities once again turn to the public in an attempt to find the men who killed Carl and terrorized his family.
Their composites are very critical in our ongoing investigation in identifying the shooters.
I remember cutting out all the headlines and all that. Boy, something's going to be recognized with the sketch, and something's going to happen with this and come about from it. But days would go on and nothing.
When the sketches were released, there wasn't a lot of information that came in. Nothing substantial at all.
Detectives hope that the autopsy report will provide a crucial new lead.
Carl had been shot 6 times. The fatal wound had penetrated his chest into his heart and severed the aorta. When you have multiple shots like that from 2 different guns, it's apparent that their intent was to kill him.
And they shot him again and again and again and again, total of 6 times.
Since the medical examiner didn't find any defense wounds on Carl, there is no physical evidence on his body to link to the perpetrators. Frustration grows when detectives get the report on the fingerprints found at the crime scene.
There were no known matches of any of those latent fingerprints. They had no real suspects.
Didn't seem like anybody was going to be arrested for this.
With the killer still on the loose, the town of Inverness is on edge, while Carl's family lives in fear.
A couple of days after the original murder, someone had put a threatening note in the mailbox. Jackie then went to the police and said she was being threatened, and that was her concern for her safety.
When I found that out, I was very disturbed. I was concerned about Jackie and the kids. Somebody wanted my brother killed.
2 weeks after the murder, police make a disturbing discovery.
It came to the attention of the initial investigators that there was a trader, worked at the Chicago Board of Trade, had just disappeared. It was suspected there was foul play involved.
Detectives learn his name is Artie Jones, and he's one of Carl's business associates.
Art Jones knew Carl. There may have been some money involved between the two of them.
No one knew what happened to him. He left for work, drove into the city, and was never heard from again.
Could the 2 cases be connected?
Now put a new light, a new focus with 2 traders in close proximity, 1 dead and 1 missing. Put a different spin on this type of investigation.
At that point in time, when we heard the news and it was all over the papers, that we thought, wow, now that we know there's something going on at the Board of Trade.
When you had Carl, who was killed and being part of Board of Trade, and then you have Artie, who disappears after going to work at the Board of Trade, those don't happen often. And when Artie Jones happened, that was very concerning. It was, we wanted to find out, okay, who's after Artie and who's after Carl, if there was somebody, in fact, after both of them.
Two weeks after Carl Gamari's murder, his coworker, Artie Jones, has vanished. Detectives are hunting for a potential connection between the 2 cases.
Through the Highland Park investigation of Artie, they interviewed his wife, and she said that since the murder of Carl, he had become very edgy. He was very secretive about going out to meet some people for business at that time and then never coming back. It just heightened that concern she had about the 2 being related.
There was just no trace of him. They ran credit checks. They did phone records. They had absolutely nothing of where this individual may have gone or why he disappeared.
They located his vehicle near O'Hare Airport.
No reason why it was there, no rhyme. Couldn't put him on an airplane. There was just nothing. He was gone.
That investigation was rather lengthy, and they never did locate him. And eventually, his wife had him declared dead. It's very frustrating to have a case that hits a brick wall.
Carl's family continues to push for answers.
I was persistent. I would call. I wanted to hear from the horse's mouth, from the detectives. What's going on? What's the next step? What are you looking at? Months and months and months turned into a year. A year turned into 2 years. Then you kind of lost faith a little bit.
Carl's loved ones try to cope with the terrible realization that his killers may never be found.
The investigation wasn't turning up anything. They broadcasted and showed those pictures of the 2 men for a long time. No one knew anything. The case is considered a cold case.
30 years later, the case is reopened.
Detectives Mike Kirby and Bill Stutzman took over that investigation, gave it new life. These were people who had investigated, hundreds of violent crimes in their careers.
I had spent 9.5 years on a homicide task force. So this was my first actual cold case.
We were told to look at this case from 30 years ago. Right away, you're like, 30 years? Who's even going to be alive from back then that we could talk to? But when we sat down and we compiled our plan of action, people we wanted to talk to, we became extremely excited about the possibility of this being solved.
As the new detectives start digging into the cold case, they are confronted with a daunting problem.
Barrington Police Department had 2 floods in their basement where their evidence was kept. These floods basically contaminated any of the evidence, ruling it unusable. Any DNA we might have was gone.
That's a major blow in an investigation. Most cold cases nowadays are solved through forensic evidence. We had none of that.
Then, in 2011, a stunning turn of events reignites the investigation.
We get a phone call. It was shocking to us.
Artie Jones had been located, living under an assumed name in Las Vegas, part of a fraud investigation by the federal government, and located him. We were extremely shocked that he was alive.
Investigators fly to Nevada to interview Artie Jones about Carl's murder.
Well, the first thing we wanted to know was what relationship did Artie Jones have at all with Carl? Did they have any kind of business transaction? He claimed he didn't even know him. So then we focused on why did he disappear then. When we talked to Mr. Jones, he said that he was having financial problems. He didn't like his job. He didn't like his life. He was unhappy with his marriage. So he just faked his disappearance. And that became very clear that he had staged all this by planting the car by the airport. The two had no connection. The Camari murder and his disappearance were not related.
With the Artie Jones mystery solved, detectives are again left with no leads.
What we decided to do was to work this like it was a fresh case. And just start from the beginning with no preconceived notions, no thoughts on where we were going to go with it.
Bill Stutzman and Mike Kirby re-interviewed everyone who had been interviewed that they could find back in 1979 and 80. And one of the people they interviewed was Jackie's sister, Tootsie. When police interviewed Tootsie the night of Carl's murder, she told them on the morning of April 30th, Jackie called Tootsie and told her to come over that day. And if Tootsie had come that day, I don't know if she would have been another victim.
Detectives bring Jackie's sister, Tootsie, in for an interview. As they question her, she makes a jaw-dropping revelation.
She said, I've been ridden with guilt throughout the years. I've seen what it did to the kids, what it did to his family. I can only be truthful about this. I can only tell you what was told to me.
Tootsie was having ulcers after the murder of Carl. She was holding a very big secret inside.
It troubled her to keep this secret for so long. She just realized, I believe, that it was the right thing to do, and that's what she always wanted to do.
And she proceeded to tell us about 2 months prior to the murder that Jackie had said, I don't love Carl anymore. I don't want to be with him. This is the time when Jackie and Carl were getting back together.
Jackie had supposedly stopped the affair with Sam Greco.
Based on what we learned, that was not the truth. Her affair still continued.
It was very shocking. It gives you a different light view of Jackie, yes, as a person and the type of individual she is.
What Tootsie says next leaves investigators stunned.
Jackie had told her of a plan that she had with Sam.
Jackie said to Tootsie, we've found a way to get rid of Carl. We're going to make it look like a home invasion. Some men are going to come in, they're going to tie me up, and they're going to wait for Carl to come home and kill him.
Tootsie couldn't believe what her sister was saying to her, and they just kind of ended the conversation with Tootsie saying, Jackie, you don't have to do that. Divorce him. Just divorce him. And Jackie would reply, if I divorce him, then I don't get all the money.
Jackie had told her how Carl was going to be murdered, and that's exactly what happened to him.
It seemed almost mind-blowing to think that Jackie could be involved in such a crime as to expose her daughters and her infant to their father getting killed in the home.
Investigators tell Tootsie they'll need more than just her word to lay charges.
They decided to ask her if she would be willing to record conversations with her sister Jackie. At first, Tootsie said no, she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to hurt Jackie.
We had emphasized with her that, no, we're not saying Jackie physically killed Carl, but she was part of a plan in which Carl was killed. And we had said, we're asking you to put an open-ended statement to her and see how she responds. She agreed to do it.
That was the missing key to make this case go forward.
More than 30 years after the cold-blooded killing of father of four, Carl Gamari, police learn his wife Jackie plotted his murder with her former lover, Sam Greco. But investigators need hard evidence to arrest her. They convince Jackie's sister, Tootsie, to record a conversation.
Hi, Jackie.
How you doing?
I'm not doing good, honey. The police have been here about Carl, and they've been asking me a lot of questions. They're saying I might have to go in front of the grand jury. I don't know if you remember what you told me.
I do. Are you going to do that, though, to me?
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to.
Oh, my God. So just tell them that I wish you were dead. Don't tell them I said that, please.
They already know, Jackie. You told me how it was going to be done, how they were going to break in and tie you up and put you in the closet and then kill Carl. You
got to help me, Tootsie. I can't go to jail. You got to help me.
I can't lie. I can't lie.
Did you just tell them you're all confused and don't remember?
But they know I remember. They know I do.
Those recorded conversations are devastating.
Jackie saying, "Can you lie for me? Can't you say you forget?" There was truth to what Tootsie was saying. And that's why Jackie wanted to lie for her. That was very damaging evidence.
Those recordings were all that were needed to have an arrest warrant issued.
Police bring Jackie down to the station.
We did not tell her she was under arrest, but she was not going anywhere. We had the arrest warrant. During the course of the interview, not only did we tell her, we talked to Tootsie, who told us about their conversation. We played portions for Jackie.
And I told you that stuff, and that's enough to put me away. What am I supposed to say when they ask me why I said that to you? What am I supposed to say?
That I can't answer. I don't know. Maybe you didn't mean to tell me, but you did.
What should I do?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
You're my sister, but you're a witness against me. Your testimony is enough to put me away. I'm going to go to jail.
Confronted by her own words, Jackie tries to put the blame on her former lover, Sam.
Because she wanted to be able to say, yes, okay, early on, I said, let's do this. But then I backed out. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So therefore, I'm not guilty of Carl's murder.
There are so many things Jackie did that tells you what kind of a person she is. She wanted to be with Sam. She didn't want to be with Carl.
After the murder, Sam and Jackie married a few months later.
Several years later, Sam and Jackie were divorced. We continued a full-force investigation into Sam Greco's involvement, as also pursuing the two shooters. And before we could gain enough evidence to charge him, he passed away from his medical conditions.
On March 27th, 2013, Jackie alone is charged with the first-degree murder of her husband, Carl Gamari.
Jackie was the true monster. Without Jackie, this crime never would have happened.
In 2016, a jury finds Jackie guilty, but the verdict is overturned on appeal. Prosecutors offer Jackie a deal. She pleads guilty to murder and is sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Justice finally was served. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it.
She was a true sociopath. And not just for taking Carl's life, but because of what she did to her children. She chose to have her children be victims of this traumatic event just for her own selfish needs to get rid of her husband.
A woman that involves her own children in a scheme, in a plan, in a plot to have their father murdered, her husband murdered. I don't know, if you ask me, that's not even human. That's the devil.
4 decades after the murder, police are still searching for the gunman.
This remains an open and active investigation. It's never going to stop. If there's any new information, the police are going to follow up on it. No matter how long those shooters live and how much time passes, they can never stop looking over their shoulder.
My brother was a good guy. He was very determined to succeed in anything he did. To see how he would have been when his children got older would have been a wonderful thing to happen, and I'm sure he would have loved it.
Who knows how our lives would have been, you know. A lot of missed opportunities, a lot of things that never happened. I lost a brother and, you know, somebody to look up to and somebody to experience life with, you know, the rest of the way. I miss Carl a lot.